Let's take a look and see how Google Analytics works. Google Analytics provides you a small piece of JavaScript that needs to go on each page of your site. This JavaScript collects the information about the user. All this data is anonymous, which means Google Analytics does not track any personally identifiable information, such as user's name, email address, etc. Google Analytics relies on an anonymous cookie to identify a user. The first time somebody comes on the site, Google Analytics assigns a randomly generated string value that gets stored in the browser cookies. Any subsequent visit to the same site by the same device are assigned to the same user. So that's how user identification happens. Advanced configuration of Google Analytics does allow you to pass a user ID. This is the user ID that you might have stored in your database. However, you cannot pass any other information about the user. Using this JavaScript and cookie, Google Analytics collects information about the user, such as where is the user coming from? That's called traffic source. Traffic source might include a search engine, social media site, your marketing campaigns, etc. Keep in mind, for Google Analytics to know the traffic source, a user has to click a link on those traffic sources. So if a user is browsing Facebook and just happens to type in the URL of your site, Facebook is not counted as a traffic source. Instead, traffic source will show up as direct traffic. However, if the user clicks on a link on Facebook that drives the user to your site, Facebook is counted as the traffic source. It also keeps track of the pages user is visiting, the actions user is taking on the site, such as clicking on a button, purchasing a product, completing a transaction, signing up for email, etc. In addition to user's activity, it also tracks information as the user's browser, what kind of browser user is using, such as Chrome, Safari, Internet Explorer, etc. What kind of device user is using to come to the site, desktop device or a mobile device, as well as operating system and the language that browser is set to. It also knows the location of the user. It uses IP address to figure out which country, which city the user is coming from. When a user comes to the site and loads the page that has the Google Analytics tracking code, Google Analytics will start to collect the data. This JavaScript will send updated information about the user's activity to Google Analytics. Google Analytics groups all the activities of a user and calls it a session when a user first comes to the website and then ends after 30 minutes of inactivity. If the user goes back to the site after 30 minutes or more of inactivity, a new session begins. It's the same user identified by the cookie, but it is a different session. So remember this, 30 minutes of inactivity leads to a new session. This value is configurable, but by default, it's 30 minutes. There are configuration settings that allow you to customize how the data is processed and stored. For example, you can apply a filter to make sure the data from certain IPs or certain browser types is not included in your report. It is particularly valuable when you have to remove all the data that comes from within your company. So you remove your internal company traffic by doing a IP filtering. And keep in mind, once you apply these filters, whatever configuration you do, once the data goes to Google Analytics, it's stored in a database that can't be changed. Any changes you make to your filter or the way you collect data only applies to the data going forward. Your previous data will still stay the same. So you keep in mind, when you set up your configuration, don't exclude any data you think you might need in future. So the best way is to collect the raw data as is, and then use views or segments to get the desired set of data. This way you'll still have unfiltered data if you ever need to go back and look at it.